Good evening viewers and welcome to the Artlit review. In our last 3 sessions, we have discussed novel, poetry and music. Today we are going to discuss film as an art form, and for this we have a very esteemed guest, Dr. ARIF AZAD. Dr. ARIF AZAD is a public policy analyst. In addition to that, he has been op-ed writer for the Dawn for last 12 years. In addition to that, his articles have appeared in The Guardian, the BBC, War and Peace Reporting, and Index on Censorship, and many other international and national magazines and newspapers. His book on thinkers, dreamers and doer has recently published last year, and he is also writer of another book, Patient Pakistan. But before we start our discussion, we have prepared a report on film for our viewers. Let's have a look at that.
Film is a relatively new art form, yet within a century the film has expanded its influence and reach all over the world. As a mass media form, it is unrivaled and stretches from Hollywood to all other film centers, with Chinatowns forming a big bulk of its audience. Russia and European cinema have a fascinating history of their own, with their own sets of innovation, ideas and sensibility informed by their unique history. By far, the greatest center of filmmaking has been the Hollywood, chosen for its sunlight and initially energized by the talent of European immigrants for whom Hollywood was the only available job opportunity. The industry has grown in scale, reach, influence, and financial clout. Along with the famous studio system which defines the operation of the Hollywood, its actors, actresses have become household names. Marilyn Monroe, Elizabeth Taylor, Sophia Loren, Greta Garbo, Gary Cooper, Clint Eastwood, Rock Hudson, Paul Newman, and Roger Moore are the striking names which remain inescapably central to our memory list. Hollywood and non-Hollywood directors too, such as Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, Frank Coppola, Woody Allen, Ken Loach, Ridley Scott are conspicuously prominent in cultural headlines. The names of Bollywood and the Hollywood films such as Sholay, Mughal-e-Azam, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, Ben-Hur and James Bond series echo down the memory lane. Cinema has exercised vast and pervasive influence on popular culture and vice versa since its beginnings. Relationship between cinema and the literature is also an intimate one, with many films based on the material originating in literature and the cinema-influenced popular culture feeding into novels and other literary forms. The worlds of imagination and literary empathy have never been richer. Used both as a propaganda and an art form of higher aesthetics, cinema has produced a spectacle of breathtaking beauty, dazzling imagination, and leaving lasting imprint on minds and hearts. With more and more financiers populating the film world, such as Amazon, Apple, and Netflix, films are set to become the dominant currency of our age, shaping our ideas of the world and our reactions to it as well. The upward trajectory of the film world is unstoppable. Sky is hardly the limit when it comes to the ambitions of the film industry.
How are you, Dr. Arif?
I'm fine. Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's really.
I have been reading your article for more than last maybe 2 decades, and you have been writing on various subjects, and very profound insights are there in your articles. You have been writing on art, literature, cinema, politics, and whatnot. So you are almost a polymath. What would you say?
I think polymath is a bit of a stretch, but I mean, having said that, I have read widely over the years, and I have dabbled into different disciplines, and that has enriched me in a way. I think I began as a very solitary child, so books became my refuge, and that's how I educated myself to be a good reader first. And then, I mean, when you are a good reader, you are a discriminating reader, the urge to write is there. And also because I was interested in politics a lot, so I just began writing articles, and my first article appeared when I was in FSC, or before that in the Muslim newspapers, Islamabad.
Interesting.
So I mean, since then I have been, and I read widely, in particular, you know, I mean, novels and, you know, in Shakespeare when I was in you know, yes, in pre-medical phase. But it really took off my interests and my reading habits. Took a very like escalated turn when I got to England, and where I read widely because it's very, you know, literate and culture. I met a lot of people, and those who, you know, I mean, inspired me to read more and also talk about ideas and others. So I was like part of social movements, I was part of literary movements, and I also used to see a lot of cinema, and, you know, in particular world cinema. And I remember there used to be like in Riverside Studio in Hammersmith, and they used to run double bill like every week. So this means 2 film on 1, you know, ticket, and I used to use that, you know, I mean, facility a lot. And it was largely, you know, I mean, European and world cinema. So that's how my interest, you know, I mean, grew in these, you know, the subjects. And thank you.
So we can say that you lived a life in arts and literature.
Yes,
actually.
yes, to a large extent this is true.
So tell me, film is relatively younger art form as compared to novels, poetry, music, general storytelling. How do you find its recent trajectory, and how it has influenced the world?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. It is, you know, I mean, relatively newer form of art, because if you look at, you know, the written words, novel, plays, and, you know, painting, sculptures, those arts are, you know, I mean, very dated. But the beginning of the filmmaker you can, you know, I mean, trace to the beginning of this century. And
last century.
Yes, yes, around 1890.
Yeah.
Around. And I think the early filmmakers were, you know, I mean, Lumiere, you know, I mean, brothers in France, and also at the, you know, the same time Hollywood was also evolving. But soon Hollywood, like, you know, I mean, really became very prominent and active in this area. And one of the reasons why it became the center of world cinema and also the center of innovations was because the film industry, like Hollywood, it got a like large injection of, you know, I mean, immigrants from Europe, you know, between the First World War and the Second World War. And these people were very creative, most of them Jewish, and they set up the Hollywood, you know, I mean, studio system, and I mean, they largely influenced Hollywood. So Hollywood became very, very, you know, I mean, prominent in filmmaking. But at the same time, there was also, you know, I mean, European cinema evolving its own way, and its, you know, I mean, key centers were in France, Germany, like, I mean, Nordic countries, and also, you know, France, also Russia in particular, because Russian film was, you know, I mean, nationalized in 1924. And I mean, Lenin thought that film could be a good medium to influence, you know, the popular masses. And the same like kind of mindset also informed, you know, in Mussolini in Italy, and the government formed its own like studio. Yes, I mean, since then there have been, like, you know, I mean, differences in the way films have been made. Because of the Hollywood system, the film world was largely, you know, in fantasy driven and the use of light and others. But soon, you know, the documentary making or, you know, factual filmmaking also took place. And the first film of like the representative film was, I mean, Nanook of the North. It was made by Robert, Flaherty, and it was about, like Inuit descent, like endangered, I mean, human being. And I mean, this film was filmed of that, I mean, community. It was more of ethnographic thing. And I mean, this, I mean, documentary like showed even the main character, actually dying. So it really. So yes, I mean, factual cinema plus, fantasy cinema or other, that was one division. And the largely it was also in the early decades, it was, silent movie era, of which the most important exponent is, Charlie Chaplin.
Oh.
And then you come, the sound gets added to the whole system, and then you get, the films with like, the talking films, and then from black and white to color. And now you see the cinema is a worldwide movement, and I mean different centers, Bollywood, Nollywood, Hollywood, and also, the European cinema has grown. And it has, I mean, really affected the popular tastes. It has influenced policy. It has broadened, I mean, collective imagination of the people. And so it has grown one of the most influential, I mean, media in our times.
You have just mentioned Charlie Chaplin. I think he was part of a lot of controversy since its beginning of his career. What do we learn from it? I mean, film has a lot of influence on society, and that's why sometimes it becomes very sensitive medium, and all those authorities who are sensitive to those issues take notice of what is being produced. So can you just tell us few examples and your comments on with reference to Charlie or other things, issues
yes, I mean,
like that?
Charlie Chaplin was, I mean, as I said, he was the first, in British export to Hollywood. Yes, I mean, maybe one of the first, I will have to check my facts, but he was the early ones. I mean, he came from very working background, and I mean, that shaped his film, yes, to a large extent. But he was, like, I mean, hugely talented. He worked in theatre, in circuses, in different. But one of his, key thing was his element of, comedy, and he's, known for that. And he produced, films like Great Dictator, and also The Kid. The Kid is very interesting film in a way that it shows how the background of, Charlie Chaplin influenced his style. Yes, I mean, he adopts a little child, and he, begins like living with him in a very small shack, like his life, he used to share very small bedroom with her mother. And then the film shows the tension between, the policeman, mother of the abandoned child. And I mean, this, Jackie Koogman is the little boy in the film. But his acting is just absolutely enormous, although it was, time of silent era. So he does very interesting things for his, father. Because he's a, glazier, he, fixes window. So he goes in the neighborhood, his son, and he, breaks the windows, and throw, stones at them. And, as soon as it happens, so his father comes and he, fixes them. But anyway, so, what happens is ultimately he's, separated from his father. And this, separation of the child by police in, father is one of the great scene in, the cinema. So
Charlie Chaplin was trying to give some message through this film? Okay.
I think background, and he also wanted to, discuss maybe the politics of adoptions,
Okay.
how, the police powers in terms of like people taking away from adoptions into the old forms. But I think his politics influenced his film. That's why, during McCarthyite times, he was in blackballed from
Yeah.
Hollywood.
That's true.
And as did happen with other, communist, leaning actors. But I think the films he made and the images he produced, they have, lingered down in different films.
Okay.
Like Avara film, the Raj Kapoor whole, get up is actually, Charlie Chaplin's get up. And I mean, this has happened as a, censorship means, because, politicians feel, because it is mass media, and it was a time when, literacy was not, that great. So, this cinema, because of its mass appeal, had to be, controlled elsewhere. In Italy, Mussolini made a separate, studio where all films were made, and I think they must have been, vetted and censored. Similarly, early films were also, censored. For example, in Stanley Kubrick film, Paths to Glory was banned in, France, because, France thought that, France was, portrayed in a bad light. And, similarly, Ken Loach, I think his film was...
We'll come to that
yes,
later,
yes,
because I have also read that in your book as well.
But just as an early examples, I thought
But
I would
before I
point it
just
out.
want to discuss something relationship between sounds and light and cinema experience, where it's darkness and there is just one screen and there is light rays which is creating its own world.
Yeah.
Would you just...
Yes, thank you very much for pointing up this, very, often untalked about aspect of the film. I think, the film was born the day light was formed.
Yeah.
And as in some, religious book, God, it said, there be light, and there was light. And then God, separated the light from the darkness. And that's how days and others were born. So, light has been the very key aspect and a key feature of the films, throughout its history. And if you go into cinema, as you, rightly pointed out, okay, you go into darkness, and then, suddenly screen, a ray of light is, beamed from the depths of darkness, and it dazzles you, it overwhelms your imagination, and it, totally absorbs you in its own world of sight, sound, and, images. And also light has been also, dividing point between different film directors and film aesthetics. When, neo-realist in Italy, began to form their own school of thought, they went outdoors and others, because they thought, studio system, the light was, manipulated, and it was not real, or others. Similarly, there is a big movement in the 1990s to 2000 and 2005 in Denmark, Dogma 95, and they made it a part of their, manifesto, that no artificial light would be used. Okay, only one camera will be allowed, and so the lights, and different directors have played playfully with the light to create different effects and shadows, and that is also very long discussion, how each director used the medium of light to create this imaginary.
Fine. So, do you think different art movements have also influenced film?
Yes.
Their presentation? And
Yes, I think these art forms have, influenced as well as, political movement. But I think the key art forms which I would like to dwell on, one is like Impressionism.
Mm.
And this was a key art movement in the Europe at the turn of the century. And so Impressionism's main key exponents were, Edward Manet and Claude Monet. And this art movement was basically it stayed away from, brush strokes. It worked in, mini strokes, outdoor, and of course, sunshines, and your reaction to natural environment, emotions and others. And I think the key film in, Impressionist filmmakings were produced in, France. And an added impetus was because, France, French filmmakers, felt at that particular point, which is, still the case largely, that American Hollywood system was overwhelming them, and, French, and sensibility and, culture was under threat. So the key filmmakers of this, the French impression like films, which were influenced by art movement, which is called Impressionism, were Abel Gassin. He was a key filmmaker of that, around 1920s to 40s, 50s, and he made one of the early film on Napoleon, and of course the second was Louis Daulac and others, so they made. And another big movement was Expressionist. This was much wider movement. It had its centers in Europe, Austria, France, Germany and others, and its key, the movement basically focused on extreme human emotions, anxiety, fears and other.
Okay.
And Edward Munch, Scream is one of its examples. But the key films were made in Germany around this. And one of the key film of that era is Robert Weiss, the Cabinet of Calgary, which is in this tradition.
Well, this was influence of art, but do you think literature is also some relationship with films?
Yeah.
Especially fiction. Yeah.
Yes, literature and film, they grow together. They complement each other. Literature, if you look at it, it mostly deals with words. You hold down a book, you read a book, and you try to create your own imaginations through the words you encounter on the page. Film, on the other hand, is a much bigger medium, although it uses words as a script form, but it takes off from there and creates a very imaginary world. So what has happened over the years that the filmmakers have used literary works for their imagination, and this book to film adaptations have been very, very popular.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare has been made into film. A lot of novels have been made into films. And this is very, in a way, collaborative, relationship.
Okay.
Because when people go to see movie which is based on a book, and when they come back home, they often feel encouraged to read books more, to go back to the original work. So it is very, collaborative and symbiotic relationship in so many ways.
You have mentioned new wave cinema in your book as well.
Mm-hmm.
Could you just tell us main features of that?
Yes, I mean new wave cinema, because there has been concern in in France in particular, as I mentioned before, against the dominance of the Hollywood. So it is in that tradition. We mentioned, I mean, impressionist film, and that kind of continued into new wave cinema. And of course the key film makers of this movement was Jean-Luc Godard, Francois Truffaut, and of course Claude Chabrol. The key features or the key elements of this new wave was that it was first of all it was largely influenced by the political movements that were happening in France at that particular point. Yes, student uprising 1968 as a whole in Europe and worldwide was a period of great political ferment. So it is basically about to depict real life in its all chaotic form. And Jean-Luc Godard's film Breathless is a key exposition of this form of art, where you see that non-actors were employed, and the people can come into the frame, and dialogue were improvised, and it was very natural. And the other key things which distinguish this new wave were long takes, jump cuts, a form of editing, you can clearly see that it is episodic like life, there is no other, and handheld camera and others. And then this new wave spread to other countries like UK and other where had it.
In your book you have written about two great directors, Ken Loach and one
Anglo-Paulus.
So what makes them worthy of notice?
I think if you watch lot of films, then you develop taste for certain kind of film aesthetics and also directors. I like these directors like Anglo-Paulus. He is one of great Greek directors who really takes our age as his subject. If you look at his film, they deal with the larger issues, exile, displacement, the tortures, and I think is in representative films like Ulysses Gaze is about Yugoslavian wars and its effects, and Voyage to Sitra is about the return of an exile to his country, which is vastly transformed by the time he returns to the country. And I think one of his biggest film for which he is known is actually Traveling Players, in which he charts the history of the Greece through the story of a traveling theater troupes, and that theater troupe travels through the villages, and they play an old story, but the larger films becomes about the censorship, about military dictatorship that was at the time ruling Greece. So that is one at one level, the metaphysical question. As for Ken Loach, Ken is the most political filmmaker, explicitly so. And his films, basically the range of his film, covers migrants, Spanish Civil War, trade unionism, aspirations of the working class which don't get fulfilled. And he has changed policies in so many ways, because his film Kathy Come Home is one of the most representative, and through this film he highlighted the issue of homelessness.
Right.
And as a result of the film, like many charities dealing with homelessness, they were formed in England and they still exist, and this issue rose to the policy prominence. And so this is interaction between the policy and cinema, which is very rare, and he is also very activist as well. He was associated with Jeremy Corbyn's bid for leadership, and he also stood as a parliamentary candidate in UK elections.
And any other director?
Yes, the other great director, I think, Stanley Kubrick. He was like a rare exception, an American who moved to England, and he spent the rest of his last 50 years of his life working from England and living in England. He is very interesting because his background was as a photographer, and his film show up influences of photography on filmmaking. He was also very finicky about aesthetics of the film. He would spend years and years conceiving a film, getting teams together, and he was also very secretive about his films as well. And I think the key of his film, Full Metal Jacket, Paths of Glory, Clockwork Orange,
Lolita.
Yes, Lolita, and of course Barry Lyndon, which was made on in Thackeray's novel. But if you look at Barry Lyndon, it is very much like every seems like the painterly and a good photographer with great aesthetic eye. He captures it.
So, Dr. Arif, what's the relationship between film criticism and the films? And if you could tell us some good film magazine, good film critics and academics.
Yeah. Yes, film criticism has been very key to filmmaking process, and some of the key filmmakers of this century began their lives as film critics, Francois Truffaut, Jean-Luc, Godard, Eric Romer. These were the people who were also associated with new wave cinema. And they began as critic, but then they moved in to the filmmaking. And one of the key influential film magazine in France was Cahiers du Cinéma, and which influenced new wave, and also which influenced aesthetics of the film. And Angelo Paulus himself began his life as a film critic, because he was educated in France, and that largely influenced him. And the other key British Film Institute magazine, Sight and Sound has been very influential film magazine. And I think one person which I would like to mention is Peter Woolen, who also began as a film critic, but then he wrote one of the most influential film book on filmmaking,
Okay.
which is called The Signs and Meanings of Cinema, and which has kind of, become classics. And I think the current crop of, film critics, I would like to mention in particular Anthony Lane from the New Yorker. Yes, he writes very beautifully about film. Yes, Richard Brody, also on the New Yorker. In England, it is, Peter Bradshaw, and before Peter Bradshaw was Derek Malcolm.
Okay.
And I think these film critics play a huge role in, making sense of films for the film goers.
Yeah.
And also they become very influential in setting the standards of the filmmaking.
So, well, I think you're also a very good film critic. So what are films of your choice, if you want to mention any?
Yeah, I think the films of my choice, first I would say, Cinema Paradiso,
Okay.
which is made by, Italian film, director Gaspare Tentore. And this is one of the best film about the power of, cinema to change and, shape the world. And the story is about a filmmaker who, returns to his hometown when he hears the death of an ex-film, projectionist. And then he goes on his, memory lane and uncovers his past. And this, because he used to be, a small boy who was very much interested in cinema, and he, struck up friendship with the film, projectionist, and he would, sit with him while the film was being played, and he would very closely watch the reaction of the audience to what he was saying.
Okay.
And you can see people, crying, the effect which film make on human emotions, and the people laughing and just crying.
And what would you tell us about contemporary trends in the cinema and filmmaking?
Yes, contemporary trends in terms of film has really evolved. I think in particular, streaming services have Netflix and Apple and Amazon, they have their own, platform. And they are making films at a very, big scale, which has really posed a challenge to Hollywood as well, and also to actual, cinema going, the trend in particular. Because COVID, emptied, movie theaters all over the world, and it moved to, streaming to a large extent. But watching films on in streaming services is a very personal experience, while in the past going to cinema when it was a big thing, it used to be very social experience as well. So film has really taken off through different new platform, and a lot of money is being poured into this, and it has become a really sophisticated operation, both technologically and also in terms of content. And there is demand for content, and more and more content producers are coming into the field, and they are making.
Well, it reminds me of something else as well. It makes me a bit nostalgic, because film being a very personalized issue now, you can just sit in your bedroom and see the films. But previously, well, I remember my childhood. My mother would take me to the cinema, and I used to see women crying if the heroine had died in the film and some tragedy had happened. And then I remembered waiting for the films coming to the cinema, and then I would make it sure that I should be there maybe on first day or second day if that film was going to be shown in that cinema. And there were a lot of other incidents used to happen. It was just a social experience. Many people would go for dating to see the film. And it has changed altogether.
Yeah.
So does it reflect something overall change in our society, or it's just technology shaping our social lives?
Yes, I mean largely, technology shaping our lives. As I said in COVID, cinemas almost got emptied out because people couldn't go there. But you are absolutely right. Before that, it used to be very, communal affairs, because there were no other, platforms available. The choice was very limited. And also, governments, recognize the importance of cinema, and also, encouraged people to gather, in cinemas. Like in Spain, Franco actively encouraged, Catholic-oriented films, and yes, they were shown in big cinemas halls, and masses were encouraged to attend, the cinema as a very, political and, social project. I think, yes, streaming services, although filmmaking and others has improved a lot, and it has more, content, but in line with, the mobile phone and others, it has also become a medium which is very lonely, and which really, has effects on different.
So thank you, Dr. Arif Azad, for this wonderful discussion, and we have learnt a lot from you. And thank you, viewers, for watching us. See you next Sunday, same time. Thank you very much.